Story 1. The Church by the River. In the sultry summer of 1998, three inseparable friends, Ethan, Jason, and Brian, stood on the cusp of adulthood, their high school years fading into memory. The trio had spent their youth exploring the dense forests and quiet back roads of their small town. But when Jason's family relocated to Lexington, South Carolina, due to his father's job, their world shifted. Eager to reconnect, Ethan and Brian accepted an invitation to visit Jason's new home for a weekend, unaware that their adventure would lead them into the heart of an unsettling mystery. The first day passed in a blur of laughter and reminiscing, but by Saturday afternoon, boredom crept in like an uninvited guest. Seeking adventure, the boys decided to hike through the nearby countryside, where rolling hills gave way to a dense forest cradling a serene river. The water sparkled under the midday sun, its gentle current whispering promises of tranquility. They followed its winding path, marveling at the untouched beauty of the landscape, unaware of how far they were straying from civilization. As dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, the trio realized they were lost. The river, once a guide, now seemed to mock them, its flow indistinguishable as upstream or downstream. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves replaced any trace of human presence, and a creeping unease settled over them. Desperate to find a phone to call Jason's parents, they pressed on, their footsteps crunching against the forest floor. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon an unexpected sight. An ancient red brick building emerging from the overgrowth like a forgotten relic. Its steeple was crooked, its windows clouded with grime, and a dirt parking lot stretched before it, littered with rusted relics of the past. Four white Chevy Novas from the 1970s, their tires flat or missing, parked in a neat row as if frozen in time. The building resembled a church, but its state of disrepair suggested it hadn't seen a congregation in decades. As they approached, faint strains of gospel music drifted through the air, accompanied by voices raised in song. Relief washed over them. People meant help, a phone, a way back. They pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into a dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the pews were filled with a couple dozen people, their clothing tattered but neatly pressed, as if they were making the best of their meager means. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, expecting warmth or curiosity from the congregation. Instead, an eerie silence descended. The pianist, an elderly woman with snow-white hair and horn-rimmed glasses, ceased playing, her hands frozen above the keys. One by one, every head turned toward the boys, their faces etched with vacant, unwelcoming glares. The air grew heavy, the weight of their stares pressing against Ethan's chest. Jason, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "We're sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We're lost and just need to use a phone to call my parents." No one responded. The silence was deafening, broken only by the creak of wooden pews as the congregation shifted in unison. Ethan's heart pounded, his instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. Brian whispered, "There's no cross in here, no Christian symbols at all." The boys exchanged a glance, their unease morphing into fear. Slowly they backed toward the door, their movements deliberate, as if any sudden motion might provoke the silent crowd. As the door clicked shut behind them, they exhaled, but their relief was short-lived. Glancing back, they saw a dozen men from the congregation standing outside the church, their eyes locked on the boys with an intensity that sent chills down their spines. Panic surged through them, and they broke into a sprint, tearing up the dirt road that led away from the church. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches clawing at their clothes as they ran. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a derelict gas station, its faded sign barely legible in the twilight. Inside, the shelves were barren, coated in dust, and a grizzled man with a greasy baseball cap sat behind the counter, reading a tattered book. "You boys lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly but not unkind. He pointed them toward a trail that would lead to a highway, his directions precise but delivered with an unsettling grin that revealed a row of rotting teeth. Thanking him, they hurried out, glancing back to see him standing outside the station, arms folded, watching them with that same eerie smile. The trail led them to a highway as promised, but darkness had fallen, and their attempts to flag down passing cars were futile. Just as despair set in, a police cruiser pulled over. The officer, a kind-eyed man with a thick southern drawl, listened to their story and drove them back to Jason's house. During the ride, he warned them about the woods, his tone grave. "There's strange folks out there," he said. "Some say they're into old, dark rituals. You're lucky you got out when you did." The boys never spoke of that day again, but the memory of the church by the river lingered, a haunting reminder of the shadows that lurk in forgotten places. Story 2: The Ouija Board in the Abandoned Church. In the crisp autumn of 2017, 3 friends, Lucas, Sean, and James, were bound by a shared love for adrenaline and mischief. At 19, they thrived on the thrill of pushing boundaries, their small New Jersey town offering little else to occupy their restless spirits. The trio had heard whispers about an abandoned church atop a secluded hill, its crumbling walls and graffiti-streaked interior a magnet for thrill-seekers and vandals alike. When October rolled around, with Halloween's spooky allure in the air, they hatched a plan that would test their courage and haunt them for years to come. Sean, the group's unofficial leader, proposed bringing a Ouija board to the church, a relic he'd kept hidden in his closet since a middle school sleepover. Lucas, skeptical but intrigued, agreed, while James, always up for a dare, was all in. They set out late one night, Lucas behind the wheel of his beat-up sedan, the Ouija board tucked into Sean's backpack. The road to the church was blocked by a rusted gate, forcing them to park on the shoulder and trek up the hill, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The church loomed before them, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Surrounded by dense woods, it exuded an aura of decay, its gravel parking lot littered with debris. The front door hung ajar, its hinges warped from years of neglect. Inside, the air was stale, the pews coated in dust and adorned with crude graffiti. The boys swept their flashlights across the room, ensuring they were alone, though the oppressive silence suggested otherwise. Sean set up the Ouija board on the floor near the altar, arranging 3 candles in a triangle around it for dramatic effect. As he lit them, the flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls, transforming the church into a stage for the unknown. They turned off their flashlights, the candlelight creating a claustrophobic bubble in the vast darkness. Sean, his voice steady but laced with anticipation, began the session. "Is anyone here?" he asked, his fingers resting lightly on the planchette. At first, the planchette moved sluggishly, spelling out nonsense words that prompted laughter and accusations of cheating. But the mood shifted when a loud crack echoed from the altar, like a wooden beam splitting in two. The boys froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. Lucas fumbled for his phone, shining its flashlight into the shadows, but the altar was empty. "It's just the building settling," James said, though his voice betrayed his doubt. They resumed, their questions more cautious now, but the planchette remained still, as if the earlier noise had silenced whatever presence they'd stirred. Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sounds their shallow breaths and the occasional drip of water from a leaking roof. Then another sound, a sharp thud, came from the altar. Before they could react, a rock the size of a golf ball landed squarely on the Ouija board, scattering the candles and plunging them into near darkness. Screams erupted as the boys scrambled to their feet, their flashlights forgotten in their panic. They bolted for the door, the church's oppressive atmosphere chasing them into the night. They didn't stop running until they reached Lucas's car, their hearts pounding as they piled inside. Lucas floored the gas, the tires screeching as they sped away, the church fading into the darkness behind them. They spent the next hour parked outside James's house, their voices trembling as they debated what had happened. Sean, devout and superstitious, insisted they'd contacted a malevolent spirit. Lucas, ever the rationalist, argued that someone else must have been in the church, hiding in the shadows. James remained silent, his usual bravado replaced by a haunted expression. The next day, Sean and James returned to retrieve the Ouija board, hoping to reclaim some semblance of control. But when they arrived, the board was gone, though the candles remained untouched, their wicks blackened but intact. The discovery sent a fresh wave of dread through them, and they left without looking back. Years later, Lucas and Sean still spoke of that night, their friendship enduring despite the distance. The church remained a forbidden topic, its memory a scar that refused to fade. Whether it was a spirit or a hidden stranger, the terror of that night had etched itself into their souls, a reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. Story 3. The Cult in Warren County. In the spring of 2023, Daniel and his girlfriend Marissa embarked on a journey to find their perfect home. Both Roman Catholics with a love for open spaces, they were drawn to Warren County, Georgia, a rural enclave where the hustle of city life gave way to rolling fields and quiet roads. Marissa, an equestrian since childhood, dreamed of a property with a barn for her horses, while Daniel sought a place where they could build a life rooted in faith and tranquility. Their day began with promise, the couple weaving through the county's back roads, visiting properties listed for sale. The area was as idyllic as they'd hoped, sprawling landscapes, minimal traffic, and a stillness that felt like a balm for the soul. As they drove past a charming farmhouse, Marissa's eyes caught a small church nestled along the road, its white clapboard exterior and modest steeple evoking a sense of timeless devotion. A cluster of cars filled its dirt parking lot, their faded paint and dated design suggesting a community of modest means. Marissa, ever the devout one, squeezed Daniel's arm. "Let's check it out," she said, her voice bright with curiosity. "Maybe there's a mass going on. It'd be nice to see what the community's like." Daniel, though less fervent, couldn't resist her enthusiasm. He pulled into the lot, parking beside a rusted red minivan, and they stepped out, noting the worn condition of the surrounding vehicles. The church's door creaked as they entered, revealing a modest interior with 5 rows of pews split by a central aisle. About 20 people sat in silence, their heads bowed as if in prayer. Daniel scanned the room, expecting the familiar trappings of a Catholic church: crucifixes, stained glass, the faint scent of incense. But the walls were bare, the altar devoid of sacred symbols, and the congregation's attire was startlingly casual, more suited to a roadside diner than a house of worship. As they slid into the back pew, the atmosphere shifted. One by one, the congregants turned to stare, their eyes cold and unyielding. Daniel's stomach churned as he realized something else. Every face belonged to a man. Marissa, the only woman in the room, seemed to draw their attention most intensely, her presence an affront to some unspoken rule. Trying to diffuse the tension, Daniel and Marissa offered tentative smiles, but the gestures were met with stony silence. The air grew thick, the weight of their gazes suffocating. Then a figure emerged from the front, a man wearing a crude mask, its features distorted and unsettling. He pointed a gnarled finger at them, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Who invited you here?" Daniel's heart raced, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "We were just passing by," he said. "We saw the cars and thought there might be a mass. We're Roman Catholic, just wanted to join." The masked man's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your church," he said, his tone icy. "You need to leave, now." The congregation's stares intensified, a silent command to obey. Daniel grabbed Marissa's hand, whispering, "Come on, honey." They hurried out, their footsteps echoing in the silent church. As they reached their car, Daniel glanced back to see a man from the congregation climbing into a gray van, his movements deliberate. Fear gripped them as they peeled out of the parking lot, the van's headlights appearing in their rearview mirror moments later. It followed at a distance, close enough to be threatening, but not overt. Marissa, her hands trembling, pulled up directions to the Warren County Sheriff's Office on her phone. Daniel drove with focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the van's presence a constant menace. When they pulled into the sheriff's parking lot, the van sped past, disappearing down the road. Relief washed over them, but the encounter left them shaken. They drove home in silence, the dream of Warren County shattered. The church, they realized, was no place of worship, but a front for something far darker. A cult, perhaps, meeting in broad daylight with no fear of discovery. The unanswered questions, why they followed, why the door was unlocked, haunted them, a chilling reminder that some places are best left behind. Story 4. The Shadow in the Church. In the early 2000s, 8-year-old Tommy was a wide-eyed Cub Scout, his world filled with the simple joys of knot tying, campfires, and the camaraderie of his troop. His family's Catholic faith was a cornerstone of his life, with regular masses at their local parish, though their habit of arriving late often relegated them to the back pews or standing room by the doors. It was during one such Sunday service that Tommy's innocence brushed against something sinister, setting the stage for a chilling encounter that would shape his childhood. The Mass began like any other, Tommy sandwiched between his mother and older brother in the back corner of the church. As the priest's voice droned through the readings, Tommy's gaze wandered, landing on an older man standing against the wall. His white mustache and thick glasses gave him a grandfatherly air, but his eyes were fixed on Tommy with an intensity that felt wrong. When their gazes met, the man's lips curled into a smile, his face contorting into a playful grimace that might have amused a toddler, but struck Tommy as deeply unsettling. Unnerved, Tommy looked away, but the man's attention persisted, his head tilting to catch Tommy's eye every few moments. Each time, he made another exaggerated face, his attempts at humor growing more disturbing with each iteration. Tommy's mother noticed, her brow furrowing as she whispered, "Ignore him." She shot the man a sharp glance, and when Tommy looked again, he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. The incident lingered in Tommy's mind, but the chaos of family life pushed it to the background. Days later, at a Cub Scout meeting held in the parish's elementary school, the memory resurfaced with terrifying clarity. The meeting was a lively affair, culminating in a scavenger hunt that sent the scouts scrambling through the gym, cafeteria, and adjacent rooms in search of scouting-themed items. A first aid kit, a rope, a flashlight. Tommy, eager to prove himself, darted through unfamiliar hallways, his list clutched tightly in his hand. His search led him to a narrow corridor near the cafeteria's kitchen, where a humming ice cream freezer caught his eye. Tempted, he opened it, finding no scavenger hunt items, but a tempting array of ice pops. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, he snatched one, the cold wrapper crinkling in his hand. Before he could retreat, a voice stopped him cold. "Don't let them see you taking that," it said, low and conspiratorial. Tommy's heart leapt as he turned to see the man from the church, his white mustache unmistakable, his smile as unnerving as before. He closed the freezer door with a deliberate thud and reached for Tommy's hand. "I've got better treats in the back," he said, his voice syrupy. "Somewhere the other kids aren't allowed." Fear surged through Tommy, his instincts screaming to run. He yanked his hand free, but the man grabbed his wrist, his grip tight and unyielding. "Shh, calm down," he hissed, his smile faltering. Tommy's fear erupted into a shout. "Help!" And the man released him, his face twisting in frustration. Tommy bolted, his sneakers pounding against the linoleum as he raced back to the gym. Breathless, he found his cub master, a kind-hearted father who listened intently as Tommy recounted the encounter. When Tommy's mother arrived to pick him up, he tearfully explained that it was the same man from the church. The cub master, alarmed, promised to report the incident to the parish, his protective instincts kicking in. In the weeks that followed, the truth unraveled. The man was a church employee, living on the grounds and performing maintenance tasks. But whispers of darker deeds surfaced. An altar boy's parents had accused him of inappropriate behavior, their allegations chillingly similar to Tommy's experience. The church swiftly cut ties with him, and though Tommy never learned if he faced legal consequences, the knowledge that he'd escaped a predator's grasp left a lasting mark. The incident faded into memory, but the church, once a place of comfort, became a reminder of the shadows that can lurk in even the holiest of places. Tommy carried the lesson forward. Trust your instincts and never follow a stranger, no matter how familiar the setting. Story 5. The Haunting Pursuit. In the idyllic suburb of Willow Creek, where manicured lawns and colonial-style homes lined streets that rarely saw trouble, Maria Russo was the heart of her bustling Italian-American family. At 39, she had traded her career in marketing for the relentless demands of motherhood, raising Lorenzo, 10, Sophia, 7, and Haley, 3, with a fierce devotion that left little room for herself. Her husband, Marco, a senior engineer at a tech firm in the nearby city, worked long hours, leaving Maria to manage their household's endless needs. Their grocery bills were a constant strain, fueled by the kids' voracious appetites and Maria's insistence on homemade meals. Lasagnas layered with ricotta, meatballs simmered in her grandmother's marinara recipe. Twice a week, she'd navigate the familiar aisles of King Colon, the cornerstone supermarket of their quiet town, or occasionally the Target a few miles away, one of the few other retail options in their sparse community. It was late August, the air heavy with the promise of fall, when Maria's routine began to unravel. A particularly chaotic week had left her behind schedule, the kids' complaints about empty cupboards echoing in her ears. Marco, drained from a high-stakes project, was home but barely functional, sprawled on the couch with a beer. Seizing a rare opportunity to shop alone, Maria left Haley with him and headed to King Colon just after 9 p.m., the store's neon sign a beacon in the twilight. With only an hour until closing, the parking lot was nearly empty, the asphalt glistening from an earlier rain. Inside, the store was a ghost of its daytime bustle, its fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across the linoleum. Maria grabbed a cart, her purse bulging with coupons and flyers she'd clipped meticulously to stretch their budget. The muzak overhead was a faint hum, barely audible over the squeak of her cart's wheels. She moved quickly, her mental list guiding her through the produce section, past towers of canned goods, and into the cereal aisle, where she paused to weigh the merits of sugary indulgence versus Marco's insistence on bran. A sudden tap on her shoulder sent her hard into her throat. She spun around, clutching a box of Frosted Flakes, to face a man, her height deeply tanned, with a baseball cap shadowing his eyes. His red zip-up hoodie and faded jeans gave him a casual air, but there was something off about him, a tension in his posture. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said, his breath sour with the tang of stale coffee and something sharper, like cheap whiskey. He pointed to a bag of artisanal tortilla chips in her cart, asking where she'd found them. Maria, conditioned by years of small-town courtesy, directed him to the snack aisle, but when he claimed he couldn't locate them, she reluctantly agreed to show him, her instincts screaming to stay put. The man, who introduced himself as Jake, followed too closely, his boots scuffing the floor. Maria pointed out the chips, her voice clipped, and tried to retreat. But Jake launched into a rambling monologue about their unique seasoning blend, his words laced with an unsettling familiarity. She nodded, inching toward her cart, but his compliments grew bolder. "You're real pretty, you know that?" he said, his smile curling into something predatory. Maria's skin prickled. She thanked him curtly, citing the store's imminent closure, and hurried back to her cart, her pulse hammering. But Jake didn't let up. He shadowed her through the aisles, his presence a constant weight. Each time she glanced up, he was there, lingering at the end of an aisle, slowing as he passed, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach churn. Maria's hands trembled as she tossed items into her cart, her list forgotten in her haste. At the checkout, Jake materialized behind her, clutching a pitiful trio of items: a soda, a candy bar, a pack of gum. His silence was worse than his earlier chatter, his gaze a tangible pressure on the back of her neck. The cashier, a bored teenager, scanned her groceries, oblivious to the tension. In the parking lot, Maria's relief at escaping the store was short-lived. As she loaded her trunk, she spotted Jake across the lot, leaning against a rusted Honda Civic that looked like it hadn't been washed in decades. He watched her, unmoving, his silhouette stark against the sodium vapor lights. Maria slid into her SUV, her hands shaking as she started the engine. She drove home, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, but saw no headlights. The familiar streets of Willow Creek felt alien, every shadow a potential threat. Pulling into her driveway, Maria's breath caught. Down the street, a car crept along with its headlights off, the same junky Honda, its outline unmistakable. It slowed, then parked 3 houses away, partially hidden by a neighbor's hedge. Panic surged through her. She bolted inside, calling for Marco, who bounded downstairs, his face creasing with worry. She recounted the encounter, her words tumbling out, and pointed to the car. Marco grabbed a flashlight and stormed onto the porch, But the Honda was gone, its taillights a fleeting glow in the distance. The incident left Maria rattled, her sense of safety fractured. She avoided King Colon for days, opting for Target despite its higher prices. But the unease followed her. She began noticing small things: a strange car idling near the school during pickup, a shadow moving past their fence at dusk. Marco, usually dismissive of her worries, grew concerned, installing motion sensor lights and a ring camera. Then a week later, in the dead of night, a noise shattered their sleep: shuffling footsteps in the side yard, followed by the faint clink of metal against their gate. Maria shook Marco awake, her heart pounding. He crept to the window, sliding it open, and froze. Below, a figure in a hooded jacket fumbled with the gate's latch. The man looked up, his face obscured, and bolted, his footsteps crunching on gravel. Marco grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed and gave chase, his shouts echoing through the neighborhood. He returned breathless, describing the Honda speeding away, its tires squealing. "It was him," he said, his voice tight. "Same damn car." They called the police, who arrived within minutes, their flashlights sweeping the yard. Maria described Jake: the hoodie, the cap, the car, her voice steady despite her fear. The officer, a grizzled veteran named Callahan, took notes, promising increased patrols. He suggested the man might have been a drifter, drawn to Willow Creek's quiet streets, but his tone offered little comfort. The police found no trace of the Honda, and Jake, or whoever he was, never returned. Marco's furious pursuit, bat in hand, seemed to have scared him off. But the incident wasn't the end. Weeks later, Maria received a call from Callahan. A man matching Jake's description had been arrested in a neighboring town for stalking a woman at a gas station. The Honda, impounded, was a match. The man, identified as Jacob Hensley, had a rap sheet: petty theft, loitering, a restraining order from an ex. He denied targeting Maria, claiming he'd only been passing through Willow Creek. The police couldn't link him definitively to the gate incident, but Maria knew. She upgraded their security system, enrolled in self-defense classes, and never shopped alone after dark. The memory of Jake's gaze lingered, a chilling reminder that even in the safest suburbs, danger could emerge from the fluorescent-lit aisles of a supermarket. Story 6. The Nighttime Conspiracy. Ethan Caldwell was 20, a junior at Clarkson College in upstate New York, when he took a job at Waldham's, a 24-hour superstore that served as a lifeline for the region's night owls. The sprawling store, with its endless shelves and flickering fluorescent lights, was a far cry from the lecture halls where Ethan dreamed of a future in environmental science. But textbooks weren't cheap, and his scholarship didn't cover late-night diner runs, so he donned a blue apron and worked the front registers, scanning items with a practiced detachment. His co-workers were a mix of college kids, lifers, and oddballs, all united by the grind of retail. Ethan's boss, Cheryl, was a no-nonsense manager who ruled the schedule with an iron fist. When Ethan mentioned his light course load on Mondays and Wednesdays, she saw an opportunity, slotting him for an overnight shift, midnight to 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. The schedule posted in the break room hit him like a punch. He triple-checked it, his stomach churning, and confronted his supervisor, Dave, a chain-smoking veteran who shrugged and said, "You're over 18. Deal with it." Quitting wasn't an option. Ethan's car payment loomed, so he resolved to endure the shift and then plead with Cheryl, citing his studies. At midnight, Ethan arrived at Waldham's, the parking lot a desolate expanse under flickering streetlights. He relieved Amanda, a co-worker who looked ready to collapse, and settled behind the register. The store was half-lit, a cost-saving measure that plunged the aisles into shadow. A surprising number of customers drifted through, truckers grabbing energy drinks, parents buying diapers. But by 1 a.m., the place was dead. Ethan scrolled through his phone, the silence oppressive, broken only by the hum of refrigerators and the distant clatter of a cart. Boredom gnawed at him. He wondered if he was truly alone. Surely a store this size required more staff overnight. As if summoned, a bald man in khakis and a polo shirt passed by, a key ring jingling at his hip and a small backpack slung over his shoulder. His air of authority prompted Ethan to call out, "Excuse me, are you the manager?" The man approached, his smile thin and unsettling. "First day?" he asked. Ethan clarified it was his first night shift, and the man, without giving his name, shook his hand with a grip too tight. "Go organize pallets in the back warehouse," he said. "I'll watch the front." Ethan nodded, though the task was vague. As he walked toward the warehouse, he glanced back and saw the man tampering with the entrance door, flipping a switch or turning a lock. Unease settled in Ethan's chest, but he dismissed it. Maybe it was protocol. The warehouse was a cavernous maze of boxes and pallets, lit by harsh sodium lights. There he met Rob, a tall man in his 30s wearing a Waldem's manager's vest. Rob introduced himself as the night manager, his demeanor calm but professional. When Ethan mentioned the bald man, Rob's expression darkened. "Who?" he asked. Ethan described the man, bald, khakis, keyring, and Rob's confusion deepened. "I'm the only manager here." Before Ethan could respond, the store plunged into darkness. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the faint glow of the dairy coolers. Rob's voice cut through the silence, urgent but controlled. "Stay here, I'll check it out." He vanished into the blackened store, his flashlight beam a weak defense against the shadows. Ethan sat on a box in the warehouse, his heart pounding, texting friends who might be awake. The messages, "Store's dark, some weird guy sent me back here," felt inadequate against the growing dread. Then a sound, a door creaking open on the far side of the warehouse, beyond the freezers. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed in the dark. A voice called out, low and gravelly, "Hey kid, you in here?" It wasn't Rob, it was the bald man. Panic surged through Ethan. He bolted from the warehouse, moving quietly, his sneakers betraying him with faint squeaks. The store was a labyrinth, the air thick with the scent of cardboard and bleach. He called for Rob, his voice trembling, but got no response. At the front, Ethan yanked at the exit door. It was locked, the automatic mechanism disabled. Footsteps approached, and he spun, stifling a scream. It was Rob, his face pale but resolute. He flicked a lever above the door, unlocking it, and whispered, "Get outside." Now. They stumbled into the parking lot, the night air sharp against Ethan's skin. Rob was on the phone with the police, his voice low and urgent, reporting an armed man who'd locked himself inside, possibly to rob the store. Ethan interrupted, insisting Rob mention the man's focus on him in the warehouse, his intent unclear but sinister. Rob relayed the message, then told Ethan to wait in his car or leave, his tone hinting at corporate liability concerns. Ethan sat in his Corolla, watching as police cars swarmed the lot. Officers stormed the store, their radios crackling. Ethan didn't stay. He drove home, his hands shaking. The next day, Dave filled him in. Security footage showed the bald man circling the store, checking aisles and locking the entrance before cutting the lights. He'd headed straight for the warehouse where Ethan had been. The cameras caught him fleeing through an emergency exit, but not before dropping his backpack. Inside, police found zip ties, duct tape, and a hunting knife, items that suggested darker intentions than robbery. The discovery sent Ethan reeling. He learned the man, later identified as Ronald Gaines, was a drifter with a history of violent assaults. He'd targeted Waldem's before, exploiting its lax overnight security. Cheryl, shaken by the incident, agreed to keep Ethan off night shifts, but the damage was done. Ethan stayed at Waldem's a few more months, his eyes scanning every customer for Gaines's bald head. The store installed new locks and hired a security guard, but Ethan's trust was broken. He quit before spring, vowing never to work retail again, the memory of that locked door a permanent scar. Story 7. The Silent Stalker. In the rural heart of Hanover, Virginia, where the horizon stretched unbroken save for the occasional silo, Caleb Monroe was tethered to his hometown by necessity. At 25, he dreamed of escaping to Richmond or beyond. But life had other plans. His mother's medical bills, his truck's endless repairs, and a string of dead-end jobs kept him rooted. His latest gig was as a night restock worker at Great American, the region's largest supermarket, a gleaming oasis of commerce in a sea of farmland. From 10 p.m., when the store closed, to 3 a.m., Caleb and a partner, Terry, Carter, or Alfonso, replenished shelves, their work a silent ballet under the fluorescent lights. On a crisp October night, Caleb arrived at Great American, the parking lot bathed in the glow of a harvest moon. He was scheduled with Terry, a jovial co-worker whose coffee thermos was a shift staple. Caleb let himself in through the back, where pallets of inventory waited in the stockroom's dim light. The store was silent, its aisles empty, the air heavy with the scent of fresh produce and cleaning fluid. He started in the bread and nuts aisle, using a pallet jack to haul boxes, rotating older loaves to the front and stacking fresh ones in the back. The work was rhythmic, a small defiance against the night's stillness. An hour passed, and Terry hadn't shown. Caleb checked the stockroom, where they stashed their belongings but found no trace of him. The back door, propped open with a rubber stopper for Terry's arrival, stood ajar. Assuming Terry was delayed, Caleb returned to work, but unease crept in. Another half hour later, he checked again. The back door was closed, the stopper outside, as if kicked away. Caleb's pulse quickened. Had Terry arrived and been careless? He called Terry's name, the sound swallowed by the cavernous store. No response. He dialed Terry, who answered, his voice thick with sleep. "You at work?" Caleb asked. Terry admitted he was sick, staying home. Caleb's stomach dropped. "Someone kicked the stopper outside," he said. Terry suggested it might have come loose, but Caleb knew better. He'd wedged it tightly. Alone in the stockroom, Caleb swept his flashlight across the shadows, finding nothing. He returned to the bread aisle, but the sense of being watched clung to him. As he knelt to stock loaves, a loud crash echoed across the store. A metallic clang, like a can hitting the floor. Caleb froze, his heart pounding. Someone was here. He stood moving to the central aisle, his eyes scanning the darkness. At the far end in the dairy aisle, a figure in black crossed the intersection, pausing to stare directly at Caleb. The man's face was obscured, but his posture was deliberate, predatory. Caleb's mind raced. Maybe it was a replacement for Terry, unannounced by their boss, Mark. He called out, "Excuse me," his voice echoing. He speed-walked down the central aisle, checking each intersecting aisle. In one, the man stood at the end, facing Caleb, his silhouette stark against the cooler lights. When Caleb shouted again, the man vanished, moving toward the back. Caleb gave chase, his sneakers pounding the linoleum. At the bread aisle, he spotted the man again, half hidden behind a shelf, his mouth agape in a silent, unsettling wave. His eyes, shadowed but piercing, locked onto Caleb's. "Who are you?" Caleb demanded, his voice cracking. The man slipped behind the shelf, disappearing. Fear overpowered duty. Caleb fled to his truck, locking the doors, and called Mark, who answered groggily. "There's some freak in the store," Caleb said, his words tumbling out. Mark told him to remove the intruder or call the police. Caleb chose 911. A cruiser arrived swiftly, its lights cutting through the night. Caleb led the officer, a stern woman named Officer Hayes, inside. They found the man in an aisle, standing motionless, as if waiting. When Hayes ordered him to approach, he complied, his movements slow and deliberate. In the light, he was a ghastly figure, pale with deep bags under his eyes, his lips curling into a predatory smile as he stared at Caleb. Handcuffed, he spoke only once, claiming he was looking for a snack, his voice a low rasp. As Hayes led him away, his gaze never left Caleb, his smile a chilling promise. Caleb finished his shift, his hands shaking, and vowed never to leave the back door open again. But the story didn't end there. Days later, Caleb learned from Mark that the man, identified as Elias Crow, was a local transient with a history of trespassing and erratic behavior. Security footage showed him entering through the back door, wandering the aisles for hours before Caleb noticed him. He'd been spotted in Hanover before, lurking near businesses after hours, but never charged with anything serious. The police released him with a warning, lacking evidence of intent. Caleb's unease grew. He began noticing oddities, a strange figure watching him from across the parking lot, a faint scratching at his apartment window at night. He confided in Terry, who urged him to install a deadbolt and carry pepper spray. Weeks later, a co-worker reported seeing Crow near Great American, staring at the store from the woods. Caleb confronted Mark, demanding better security, and the store hired a night guard. But Caleb's trust was shattered. He quit a month later, taking a job at a diner. the memory of Crow's smile a lingering nightmare.